Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. And I'm going to do a fun exercise for myself. There's two bands I picked out that put out first albums that are really rooted in the 60s and have a pretty mellow sound, and then warped into something more looking towards the late 60s and the early 70s. And the basic premise of my theme is what happened to their old fans that really loved the first album and then were shocked by the second album. And the first of these is the Paupers, and they came out of Toronto. Were together from 1965 and 1968, and their records were pretty easy to get and pretty cheap. I bought both of them in cutouts for about 50 cents a piece, probably about 1970 or so, and it was great to get two albums by the same band in cutouts because I really wasn't sure what to expect. The first one definitely has more of a 60s look to it, and looks like it might be happy-go-lucky, and it kind of is. And so let me get into the band a little bit first. In 1964, they were called the Spats, and then by the mid 60s, 65, they changed their name to the Paupers. And it was Skip Prokop on drums, Bill Meisner on rhythm guitar and vocals, Chuck Beal on lead guitar, and Denny Gerard on bass. And they were a big band. They won a bunch of contests up there in Toronto and were one of the top bands in Toronto. So they immediately signed to the Red Leaf label and released two 45s, and then they moved to the Roman record label and did two more 45s, including a cover of Long Tall Sally. And then Bill Meisner left in 1966, and then Adam Mitchell came in on guitar and vocals, and then they signed to MGM, and their contract was switched over to Verve Forecast because Albert Grossman, who was Bob Dylan's manager, saw them in 1967 and thought they were really great, so he got them signed to Verve Forecast Records. And they did a showcase gig at the Cafe Go Go opening for Jefferson Airplane, and they played Cafe Go Go with Cream. They opened for Grand Ballroom for the MC. They opened for the MC5 at the Grand Ballroom. So they were playing for some heavyweight bands, and it's kind of surprising when you hear that first album, Magic People. It's a pretty mellow, generally mellow, easygoing, classic 67 rock record. So it has a lot in common with the gentle feel of a lot of records of that period. Got some decent harmonies. The songs are very simple, folk based, early rock and roll. Pretty stark, just the two guitars and vocals, um, drums and bass. And but the record gets kind of interesting when you listen to it closely because there's a lot of interesting psychedelic elements here and there that make the record just a little bit more interesting. There's actually a couple of extended guitar leads on it that are pretty tasty. So it's not a totally exciting record. It doesn't have a lot of drama. There's not a wide range on the record, but it's a very pleasant listen. And over the years, the more I've listened to it, the more I've pretty much enjoyed it. And so, November 1967, their first album came out, Magic People, only reached number 178 in the Billboard charts. And then by 1968, Denny Gerard left to join the McKenna Mendelssohn Mainline, which is another kind of notorious band from Canada. And then they brought in Brad Campbell on bass as well. And then the record uh, languished somewhat, but Verve Forecast stuck with them, and they actually played the Monterey Pop Festival, and pretty wild. They obviously were a top tier band at the time, and people were excited about them, so they actually played the Monterey Pop Festival. And I don't think any tapes have surfaced, but there's been a lot of discussion that they weren't that good at that show. But if anybody knows anything about that, go ahead and pipe in. But 68 was a big year for them. 1968, they opened for Jimi Hendrix and Soft Machine in Toronto, and they added a keyboard player in July of 68, John Ord, and then they had guy Skip Prokop, the drummer, actually left and formed his own band called Lighthouse, which was a brass-oriented rock band that ended up putting out one album, and then Brad Campbell, the addition of the bass player after Denny Gerard left, joined Janis Joplin's Cosmic Blues Band. And then in October of '68, um, Denny Gerard actually returned to the band and joined up with Mitchell Beale and Ord again, and then added Roz Parks from Edward Bear. And so they continued to play and recorded the album Ellis Island. And what a dramatic change! I can't believe that people that bought that first record um, weren't totally shocked when they got to the second record, because it opens up with a 8-minute psychedelic nightmare called South Down Road, and it mixes orchestra with some of the most radical '60s fuzz guitar I've ever heard, and it's just a complete noise fest, and I totally love it, as you would imagine. And then it goes through, kind of the normal tunes you might expect from the Paupers. Cairo Hotel's a nice lilting, slower number with horns, and then Can't Go On is um, another kind of standard Paupers tune, and then they do another song called Another Man's Hair on My Razor, which is a kind of a spoof of country, but succeeds pretty well. And then they get to another song called Numbers, which once again is loaded up with some just crazy fuzz guitar and a lot of darkness, completely opposite of the first album. And then Oh That She Might follows up, and then another crazy fuzz drenched rocker called Yes I Know. And then they add another weird tune, Ask Her Again, which features the Japanese koto as the main instrument, and then finish up the album with Juliana. So anyway, like I say, I can't believe that it's hard for me to believe they didn't totally alienate their original fan base with a completely conventional, easygoing, mildly psychedelic first record, Magic People, and then they come out with Ellis Island, and it's just a whole nother ball game. Very, very noisy in a lot of parts, a lot more experimental, and I've grown to love it over the years. I consider it kind of a psychedelic masterpiece now. I remember when I got both these records back in 1970. Um, I thought they were interesting enough to keep in my collection, and I still have them. And I've grown to love both albums. But I wasn't quite sure what to make of them at the time. But the Paupers are definitely rising in value. Like I say, you could get them for about $10 for most of the last 50 years, and they're very common. People didn't really talk about them much, but now, with all this interest in '60s and '70s music, it's really caught up with them, and it's cool. I've arrived at the same point that I think the Paupers are definitely well worth having in the collection, and even though they're completely different listens, both albums are worth having. So anyway, I'll put the links to both albums below, and check them out. I don't necessarily think anybody's going to be overwhelmed by them, but hopefully there's people out there that are watching my channel that like that '60s psychedelia. I'm going to try and cover more '60s psychedelia because I focus a lot on the '70s because that's really my era. The tail end of the '60s and the '70s is really my era. So I over the years, particularly getting into the late '70s and early '80s, I started looking back more at '60s bands, both the ones I loved like Steppenwolf and Blue Cheer and Cream and Iron Butterfly, but started checking out a lot of the second and third tier bands too because I just love that sound. So anyway, the Paupers, check them out. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.